It would be hard to say because even when I was very young, very young, I always wanted to be a doctor. So that's a lifelong thing. You'd have to ask me when I was 10 years old. Other kids wanted to be football players and president, and I wanted to be a doctor. So.
Why?
Well, I don't know why I was enamored by it at an early age. I will say that my brother is also a nephrologist, and we both somehow, but we have nobody else who's a doctor in the family. We just somehow, caught on to that, and I never sort of looked back. I've never regretted it, not a minute. I'm as happy as I could be doing what I'm doing. So, but I think maybe the answer is that I get up almost every morning. I'm looking in the mirror, brushing my teeth, and I think to myself, who am I going to help today? And there's always, I can think of, I'm going to help this person, this one. There's always a bunch of people I'm going to help. And a lot of professions, you get up, you go to work, but you can't say you helped anybody. You can't say you really did anything that's different than you'll do the next day. That's, yes, there are many ways to help people, but it's easiest to see as a doctor. You feel it the most.
And nephrology?
Well, nephrology, I originally was interested in this even back in medical school. I thought it was one of those fields where you had to know a lot about the subject. Now remember, you're going way back, into the, I guess 1960s and 70s, that when I was in medical school, and people didn't have iPhones where they could look everything up. You had to either know the stuff right away or you didn't know it, and it was, a lot of it was spot stuff, and nephrology was that kind of a field. And there were other fields like that. My other great love was infectious disease, but the problem in infectious disease is that you can't follow the patients. That they either get better or they don't get better. In nephrology, you can follow them, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to see. I have in my office a scrapbook right behind me which has pictures of the patients and their children and grandchildren. I can look at all these kids and grandchildren that wouldn't be there if we messed up and didn't do a good job on the person who's grandma or grandpa now, but they were young then. So it's a long-term follow of patients. I have many patients now that I follow for 30, 40 years. So it's a very good feeling to know their whole family and know what you've done for them.
If you had to choose today, would you choose nephrology again?
Oh, I definitely would. I love nephrology. I will say that one of the things is it's the area of nephrology I'm in, and that is studying diseases of the glomerular filters. And for years, people told me, oh, that's not important. Transport is important. Growth and development is important. Now, all of a sudden, with genetics, with the newer drugs, it's become very important. So I think these are diseases where there are a lot of young people have them. It's older people too, but a lot of young people. You can change somebody's entire life this way. We have newer medicines which we didn't have before, and we have the genetics that we can actually look at what the cause of many of these diseases are and sort of separate them into different categories now, which we just could not do clearly. So now we know the diseases. Yes, but I do want to make it clear that I'm full-time academic at Columbia. I'm in charge of 15 to 20 research grants at any time, that I travel all the time teaching. So the patient care is only one part. But I do see between 900 and 1,000 patient visits a year, and it's a relationship which is being lost. Now that medicine has become a business, people come in, they get seen, they go out. You don't have time to talk to people, and I've got my office arranged so I do have time. So I can tell right away by looking at them. Even while I'm working on the computer processing my note, I can tell if there's something wrong in this person's family life. If you follow them a long time, you know when, they say something and they pause, or a tear appears in their eye that something is wrong, and that's something that it's a wonderful part of medicine. It's an area that you can really help people, and I think that is, at least in the United States, it's getting lost as medicine becomes more and more of a business.
Do you think it can be rescued again?
I would hope so. I think it could be rescued, and this is one of the things that we're working on at Columbia, recognizing other activities aside from billing. Billing the patient is not the most important thing. That education is important. Research to help people is important. That knowing what's going on so that you can, even recruiting patients into studies. We never have to send out notices at Columbia because we follow the patients. We know right away who will be a candidate, and we can explain to them why we think they are, and then they choose. But it's never been a problem. That patient relationship is very important. Well, I will say universities have become a business too. So now I'm not trying to hold back the tide of time. I mean, if it's going to change, it's going to change. But if you lose the most important things about the doctor-patient relation, the understanding what's going on in their lives and everything, you'll take the joy and the importance out of medicine, because you can help people so much more if you know what's going on. But, it's not just the medicine itself; it's also the interrelationship that counts a lot. So research is also changing in nephrology and in medicine, but we have always oriented our research towards clinical care. We find a problem that will help the patients if we solve the problem, and we try to do the research in that area. And there's always pharmaceutical drugs that can be used. But again, it has to be something that we think would be beneficial to the patient. That there are many studies that you look at and you say, well, gee, this drug will get approved by the Food and Drug Administration, but is it really going to help anybody? Probably not. If it's similar to all the other drugs that are out in the same class, it's a Me Too drug and it's not going to help. So, looking at things that actually can make a difference is very important. You can only do so many studies that, and we're always trying to do plenty of them. That fortunately, I've surrounded myself by very good people. I have excellent young people. I mean, I have a feeling if I disappeared tomorrow, that my glomerular center would do just as well, if not better. I mean, the young people are excellent, and they share the same values. And all of them, literally all of them, have at least spent a year of training with me after their nephrology fellowships, where they've just spent a year as a glomerular fellow with me. That's true for all the people who work with me right now, and they go out and get great jobs, hopefully doing the same thing and having the same feeling. I think I could. The best profile of a teacher is to have humility and be humble, because even though you know the information, the student and your colleagues may not know it. There's new information coming out all the time. And to show them the appreciation of gaining the knowledge is the most important thing. I know the medical students that I teach at Columbia, the ones who don't go into medicine or nephrology, they'll probably forget all of what I said if they're in psychiatry or radiology. But they'll remember my enthusiasm for teaching, my enthusiasm for the patients. Likewise, they may remember individual things that, where they say, oh, I can remember Professor Appel saying this, that, it comes back to you. Teachers make a huge difference in people's lives. So giving them the right values, the fact that you don't stop learning. You keep reading your journals and you keep going to conferences your whole life. That's the important part of teaching. The individual facts get less and less important now in a modern age where somebody can plug into a computer or on their iPhone and find the answer in 2 minutes. The facts are there. It's trying to put them together and getting an appreciation of keeping up with things.
So, what about your teachers?
I've been blessed with wonderful teachers over time. That there are some that stand out more than others. The original person who recruited me to come back to Columbia after I did my internship and residency, I went away. I did a fellowship year at Columbia, then I did 2 more years at Yale. The person who recruited me to come back as head of the division at the time, Dr. Jay Meltzer, that Jay is, I'm going to say around 90 now, that he's in a wheelchair. He comes to rounds. Once a week, he doesn't do anything, but he comes to rounds, and his mind is sharp, and, it's just wonderful to see that, and to see that his interest and enthusiasm continues. The person who was head of renal pathology, who has been named one of the fathers of renal pathology for the United States, Conrad Pirani, he came when I was a very junior house officer, just a wonderful person, a great teacher, very critical, but very critical so that you could do a good job. And you knew that it was always to try to help you, and people like that made all the difference in the world. And then over time, I've just had very good people who have either run the division at Columbia and let me do what I wanted with the glomerular center, encouraged me, or even the heads of medicine have let us done this. So having good teachers, keeps people in academic medicine. It keeps them enthusiastic about teaching, about doing the research to help people, and even continuing, working beyond a certain age. We have many of my colleagues are at the age that they're retiring, and I don't have any plans to retire right now. You have to have good support. That I think, to be a happy and a good physician, it's wonderful to have a good spouse, whether it's a husband or a wife, that who understands this and understands that there are meetings and you're constantly doing things, and sometimes you're staying later at work than you want to stay, or there's a meeting on a Saturday that you go to. That helps tremendously. I've been blessed. My wife, she has a PhD in biochemistry, was in the renal division. Her father was a doctor and a psychiatrist, so she knows a medical life, and I think that's very hard for people to adapt to. The other thing is that I will say that if you really want to be happy in your profession, whatever it is, that you can't ignore your family or your children. That putting the time in when they're young, you can't go back and do it again. So I spent a lot of time. When I was young, I coached 21 teams. I used to coach 1 soccer team, 2 basketball, and 1 baseball every year, 3rd through 8th grade for my 2 boys. And I don't regret a minute of it. And there were times where I had to miss conferences, or there were times where I would go into work, put on a dialysis shift, come home, coach a basketball game, go back, put on another dialysis shift, come back, and coach the next basketball game. But I think it makes a difference. And everybody is, people are understanding. If your family will be understanding it, they know that, why you're doing it. So I think any of the good things I've done, over time, my wife certainly gets at least half credit.
So I see that you do not divide life and work.
No, they're all so intertwined. The work, I don't want to call it work, because the activities that I do through the patient's research and everything, those activities are very enjoyable. They only get to be difficult when you have too many of them at the same time, when you have conflicts. But there's nothing nicer than being on vacation and taking an hour to answer email that you couldn't normally answer and do that. And again, integrating your life and your work so that, you can get both done and feel satisfied with it is very important. Right now, the exciting thing is the newer medicines we're using, because we can treat diseases we could not treat before. And we can also take diseases that we could treat, but treat them with drugs that are much better. So I'm very enthusiastic about some of the studies we're doing that have changed the way people practice medicine. Some of our major studies changed, they used to use a chemotherapy agent all the time to treat lupus. This is a disease of young ladies, who got hair loss and all kinds of cosmetic things and other problems from taking those medicines. They don't have to take them now. We've proven that another medicine that's much more benign is just as effective. But if you go all the way back, I will say one of the most satisfying things was one of the first paper I got in the New England Journal of Medicine, which was with my wife. She was the first author, I was the last author. We worked on together, and that was getting that accepted, said, even, working from the very bottom, you could get something done that, would make a difference for people.
It was about?
Well, it was about people who spill a lot of protein, nephrotic patients, and why they had a high cholesterol. And there were no drugs for cholesterol then. It was before all the statins were out. So trying to find out the reason was very important. And we could measure a number of things that, not just the protein in the blood, but a bunch of things like viscosity and oncotic pressure. Because my wife's a biochemist, she could measure those. We could find out what the driving force was in terms of this. So it was something that you could say was clearly going to lead to things that would help people. That it was, for us, a major thing to get an article in a journal like that, right? This was way back. So with that, and doing it together with my wife was a big thing. I think the thing that I like the most is the interaction with my patients, at the same time the interaction with the young people who are with me. At the Glomerular Center at Columbia, we see about 3,000 to 4,000 patients a year, but it's all for people with problems with diseases of the filters of the kidney, the glomeruli. They fly in from all over, they come from local areas as well. We always have visitors from other places. Right now we have somebody from Sardinia who's been with us for 3 months. Loretta is here at the conference. She'll come back for another 3 months with us at Columbia. We have a medical student from London. We're getting somebody from McGill University in Canada starting next week. So there's always, 2 or 3 people from overseas. We learn what they do. They learn our way of doing it. At the same time, we're seeing fascinating cases. It's always a challenge, trying to think, how could you do this differently to help this person, even though the person, wherever they work, is smart, knows the literature and everything, but they may not have seen as many cases, and they may not have thought about what is actually the best for the patient. May not be the routine thing, but something different. So the challenges are very good. It's exciting. I enjoy tennis. I play tennis, 1 day a week during the winter, often 2 days a week during the summer. Enjoy my family. I have 2 grandchildren, so we spend a lot of time traveling between New York and Chicago to see the grandchildren, and this is a good time. One's 13, one's almost 11, so they're at an age where I can still do things with them, and they're not embarrassed to be with Grandpa, and which will change very shortly, but still it's very good. that I enjoy following sports. I'm always taking care of some professional athletes, and I enjoy following their teams. That's been an interesting thing over my career, is taking care of professionals who have changed. There was one point where my wife and I were the only people in New York City who were rooting for the Chicago White Sox, the Miami Heat, and it was the Carolina Panthers for football. So but that was because I was taking care of a patient on each team. Oh, I would encourage them. I would love to see at least one of them become a doctor. I have two sons. One is a lawyer, does intellectual property law. The other one is a psychiatrist, but he had a very circuitous route to psychiatry. He got a Harvard law degree first, then after that, in doing ethics for a number of years, went to medical school. So I'm delighted to have a son who's a doctor, and I would love to have a grandchild who's a doctor. I'd love to have them both, but I don't think that's likely.
And what would you tell them?
I would tell them, if they think they're going to love it, yes, do medicine, but they should do what they love. Even in medicine, there are many different fields. Some people, don't want the interaction with the patients all the time. They become radiologists or pathologists. Other people thrive on the interaction, and there are all different ways to do this. But, do what you love doing. If you do that, you're going to be happy eventually. I guess that depends on what you consider poetry. A couple of years ago, Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for literature. A lot of people said, well, wait a minute, that's not literature. Those are words to songs and everything. But other people said it is literature. I mean, there is poetry in a sense. I mean, that it doesn't necessarily rhyme. But if you consider poetry a patterning of, that has meaning to it, there is. There's poetry in our lives and in the medical profession.